reading this story, I was drawn to a different point in history. I kept thinking about it, and I wanted to cut it for time, this story, but I just kept thinking about this story. It's a point in the Peloponnesian War about the year 430 BCE. Athens is at war with their rivals, Sparta. They're about 15 years in. And there's an island off mainland Greece called Milos. Milos is Switzerland of the ancient world. They are just not having war. They're not picking sides. They're distant relatives to Spartans. But as the war was starting to go one way or another, the Athenians sent 30 ships and over 10,000 soldiers to take the island of Milos. They surround the island and they say, you're either going to pay us homage or you're going to side with us. And Milos is like, you are Athens. You are the home of education and philosophy. Why would you, what's the morality of taking a neutral country, a neutral island? And Thucydides, the founder of Western history, writes the response that Athens gave. The powerful do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. The powerful do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. There are many of people who believe that this is kind of the backbone of human history. When you take a big perspective, a big look on just about every corner of our world, you can almost apply this saying to every nation of every people. That the strong do what they can and the weak do what they must. And there is plenty of evidence on both ends of that equation of strong building, gaining, maintaining, and defending its power. Whether on your phones and notifications that you receive about kings, rulers, politicians of every stripe, using human beings as chess pawns to acquire more. And at the same token, you can hear about the weak who are suffering what they must. 246,000 children died last year due to malaria. 246,000 died, most of them poor, the vast majority of them poor. Malaria is practically a treatable disease. How did 246,000 children die of malaria? Well, they didn't really die of malaria. They died of a lack of medical infrastructure and the will of people in power to create that infrastructure. The powerful do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. This is obviously how the Pharaoh who comes to power, not knowing Joseph, decides to rule Egypt. We have been on this long journey. The whole book of Genesis, to some extent, is an explanation to the freed Jewish slaves. This is how we got here. And then a Pharaoh rose up who didn't know the story. And you see this kind of rising increase of anxiety within Pharaoh, using the same kind of fear tactics that any majority or people in power would use for a minority. There are going to be so many of them. They're going to overrun us. It's a threat to who we are as a people. I'm not even talking politics. I can bring this to the church, man. Once I have heard of churches where they actually do grow the youth. And then the youth want involved to say over how the worship goes, or what color the walls should be, or the carpet. Don't they know? They want seats on ad council. So here's Pharaoh, and he just The reason I applaud the laughter, because he seems like, most of you, if you were like me, you were raised on that Charlton Heston movie, right? Yul Brynner as Ramses. All you needed was the Darth Vader music when he entered the room. Dum dum, like just deep voice, evil stare, the eyes. But the problem is he's less Darth Vader and he's more of a Quentin Tarantino villain. As evil as he is, he's also racist. And that's what's funny about it. He ends up saying, okay, what we're going to do this awful, awful, awful thing of hiring midwives to kill babies. This is cartoonishly evil. And when he corners the midwives over why they haven't done this, he goes, well, you know those Hebrew women. They're just out there. They give birth so quick. And he goes, you're right. Yeah. It's not your fault, midwives. That's Quentin Tarantino level villainy, right? But then he doubles down. He makes this so much harsher. He says, if you find him, every boy gone. This is the fear of when you have power. And when you say power, it's easy to look at Pharaoh and say, well, that's power. But it's every level of power. Once you've accumulated any kind of security or standing, there is the thing, that fear of loss, of what that can do to you, to your soul. It plays into the next chapter, which is the birth of Moses. You have this reaction where it's a really beautiful imagery. And if you've been following Genesis, if you are molded, shaped, and you are formed and fashioned within the book of Genesis, you're reading the first chapters of Exodus, and you're like, wait a minute. So the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, are being fruitful and multiplying. Where have you heard that before? Okay. There's an evil city that they're using bricks to build something, and the evil ruler thinks themselves a god. That should sound like the Tower of Babel. Okay. And now there's water, and water, which is a life-giving source, is wiping away life right now, and then God enters this story through a boat, a basket, or the real direct word from Hebrew, ark, amongst the water that is washing away the life. Let me see a few head nods. Am I making any sense? So you're seeing this kind of the imagery play out, that God is doing a whole new thing again, that this is God's still in the midst of this calamity, not in the seats of power, but amongst the weak who are suffering what they must. But God is still present with them and starting a new thing. And I love it. Who is the way this book is written, not just as this all these homages to Genesis 1, not just these kind of touch point references. So you guys all saw the Yul Brynner movie. You know Yul Brynner as the Pharaoh, but I bet you remember his name. Ramses, right? When I read this scripture, the only time you heard the word Ramses was the name of the city. The movies remember the Pharaoh's name, but the Bible doesn't. The movies remember the Pharaoh's name, but the Bible doesn't. You know who the Bible remembers? 2 midwives. It writes down Puah and Shiphrah. Who do you want to be on the side of? Sure, there are plenty of books written about pharaohs, of every single one of them. But God remembered the names of the two midwives who are just going, you know what? I know what the king of the world, the king of this world has issued a decree. These two midwives, these two women are just like, nah, it'll be fine. Moses' mom? Nah. No, this one's... and this particular translation, seeing that it was a fine baby. Well, one, they're all fine. I think that'd be like, every baby is just that's a fine baby. It's a baby, it's fine. Putting it among the reeds. Oh, man. So where do you get that? How can we see these women in this story as models for where we are called to be? The thing about the Bible is it doesn't refute that the strong do what they must and the weak suffer, or the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. It says it rejects that narrative for those who want to follow the one living God. Amen. This is the whole of Jesus' ministry. You have God who is all-powerful, who is power itself, who is love itself, who has slipped into human skin and chooses, in the midst of the love for all of creation, to go through the worst possible ending to a story. And in so doing, redeems that story, redeems all suffering, everything that the poor have endured from the very beginning to the end of time has found its meaning in the death and resurrection of Jesus. But we still struggle in the midst of a story that tells us that the strong must do what they can. And to make it more real, to pull this back from pharaohs and kings, I went through something. I went through a time of my life that was unhealthy. And it didn't ruin everything, but I developed practices, let me see if you can relate, that work became life. I lived to work. It was, clergy succumb to this just as much as some of us. You show up around your peers and you're like, yeah, I work about 55 hours a week. You say kind of pridely, And I was in a situation where it was required. It just felt like that's what had to happen. And I kept working and toiling and being, and I'm like, I got to achieve, I got to grow, I got to build this church, and then all my circumstances changed, but my practices didn't. And I was still like that. And it was driving everyone in my life crazy. And then I was having coffee with a retired clergy, a retired elder, and I'm just telling him, at first I'm using it as pride of how much I'm working, of how much I'm producing, of how and I can't take a day off because I don't, And the retired clergy is looking at me and just says, you don't have to live like this. And I'm like, but it's just the way things are. It's how the ministry's going, and you don't have to live like this. And then it starts turning me a little bit, like, well, maybe because of Jesus, what Jesus did for us, and like I really, what I should be doing, and that's when he looks over the adult beverage, stares me dead in the eyes, and says this, and I'm going to say this as clearly as I can: do not should on yourself. I said, well, but I really should. I really don't should on yourself. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to suffer what you must in this situation. The fear of losing the control over the weak over my time, over the outcome. That if I control every aspect of every minute of every day, if I have quantified my sleep to the exact amount I need to optimize my day so that I am on time, on charge, and I am captain of my ship, and everything will sail okay, but something's going to go wrong. And it might ruin me or break me or send me into a spiral or an early a retirement by other means other than age. What can fear of the loss of power do to your life? How has that shaped people that you know? You can tell it in relationships. It's one of the things, the longer you're in a relationship, whether that's, a mutual relationship or a relationship that you have with your kids or the relationship you have with your parents, when those begin to change due to time because you're a human being and you grow and you change, and you see that change happening, for some of us, this instills so much fear that we will either maybe avoid the relationship with that person, sabotage the relationship with that person, or grip so tightly that it's suffocating. My 3-year-old is now at a point where he really wants to argue with me. And he's no longer the 2-year-old who's like, Dad, Desmond at 2 was so agreeable. If I just treated him, this 3-year-old, like a 2-year-old, how well do you think that would turn out for me? For those of you who have raised teenagers, how would it have worked out if you treated them like they were 10? For those of you who have adult children, how lucky have you been of trying to raise their grandchildren for them by proxy? Calling them up and saying, you know what you really should be doing? Do not should on your children. Just leaving that out there. Changes in relationships with your spouse, your partner. It's not what it was when you started dating. The number one thing that I try to tell people who are about to enter marriage, if you're doing this to save it, don't do this. The ceremony isn't going to save the marriage. The ceremony only highlights whatever's going on. What can fear drive us to do? The fear of losing, the fear of having those conversations, the important ones. I'm not about to dive into these conversations just yet today, so you can breathe a little easy, but I'm going to say the reason why we as Midwesterners find it so hard to talk about religion, sex, or politics, or money, the reason these conversations are so hard is because they're so powerful. And they were shaped on how your upbringing, you have a lot invested in them. And I think our quieted nature has cost us to withdraw from these conversations. And when that happens, sometimes toxic views have larger say because they have louder voices. Fear can also drive churches. Some of it is because conversations are hard to have. For all the same reasons. You've been in a church your whole life. Let me tell you about my wife's grandmother. I love her so much. Her name is Marilyn. She's 101. She's going to be 102 in like a month or two. When I met her, she's like, I'm not living long. I'm like, that was 12 years ago. She's still around, and she grew up in this church that her grandfather built. Right? There's enough of her family blood in the very wood of the church that it's practically a relative. Right? And that church has Christmas Day worship services. So I've actually gotten to worship there. Right? Only church I've ever heard of that has Christmas Day. Almost every other church, it's Christmas Eve. Unless we want to change things? No. Well, they have Christmas Day worship. And I show up, and I'm sitting down, and I've been a pastor long enough, and I'm looking around at the church. I'm looking at the paraments. The paraments is a good church word. This is your church vocab for the day. A parament is the things that cover the pulpit and the altar. Frequently they're matching, right? They're seasonally. And I'm looking at it, and the altar has a parament that's covering it. This is Christmas. You bring out the nice stuff for Christmas, right? And it's got a hole from age worn into the corner of the parament. I've never seen that. It looked like an old sock. And I have all this going on in my head as I'm looking at this parament, and I'm just thinking to myself, why haven't they replaced it? And I brought it up. Why, I have no idea. I brought it up at lunch, and they're like, oh, Marilyn made those. But I'm going to be the family favorite. And then they said Marilyn made those 80 years ago. And when I asked, so I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Marilyn about it. And when I actually talked to Marilyn about it, because that was the thing. This is her kids are all giving me the stink eye. All 8 of her kids, the uncles and everything, they're like, you don't talk about it. I actually talked to Marilyn about it. I'm like, Marilyn, those are really nice paraments. The cross was actually, you could see the cross on it. It was still really good stitching. And she goes, I made those 80 years ago. She goes, I never thought the church would keep them this long. I never meant for them to last this long. What she doesn't say is she's sad. I could see it in her that what she really wants for her church is new paraments. Not because she wants her paraments replaced, but she wants enough new life in her congregation that the paraments were replaced. Right? And what her kids see, when their kids see the paraments, is they see their mom. They see when they were kids, that Christmas Day service, and they're looking at the parament or the whole of the church, and all they're seeing is all of their memories. They see the people who loved them up into their life, into who they are right now. They see that just draping their church. They don't see the whole or the intent. And so the church feels frozen. You're holding on so tightly that things that could or should change, just that were meant to change, won't. So the question becomes, not just for them, but for you, for me, where's that retired friend who can tell you don't have to live like this? What are the paraments that have been hanging up in the rooms of your mind? You have that mental furniture that's trusted and brand new, but it was never meant to last this long. It's been worn out and beaten. What are the midwives in your life who see the oppression that is going on and acting accordingly accordance not to the rulers of the day, but towards justice. Maybe collectively, maybe that's the role of the church, is to be that midwife for you, for our town, for our state, country, world. We are called to be midwives of justice, peace, love, reconciliation, the working of the Spirit to do something new. To seek justice for the millions, for all the weak, till the fullness of God is revealed. Amen.